Hi there, welcome back to the channel. My name is Nicole. Today's video is a bulk canning day. We are going to can more than one thing in one day. I normally don't do this, but every once in a while it just works out where I need to can more than one thing in one day. So I'm going to take you along and share some tips and tricks, things I've learned along the way to streamline canning, because I'm sure just like me, you're a busy person, and especially if you're a mom, you just really don't have one full day to dedicate to canning alone. My days are full of prepping meals and homeschooling, doing laundry, keeping up with the cleaning and maintenance of the home. We have animals, lots of just moving parts in my day, and so I just don't have a huge chunk of time I can devote to canning. So I've learned how to incorporate canning into my regular daily life so that I can get it done. So today we're gonna be canning chicken bone broth in the pressure canner, and we'll be doing pickled eggs in the water bath canner. One thing that I've learned with canning, especially being a mom, is that you just have to learn to break it up into little parts. And there are some recipes where you can't really do that. For example, peaches, you have to kind of get those all done in one day. But a lot of the other recipes, I can prepare the food on one day and then do the actual canning the next day. And this just makes it so much easier to tackle and just fit into my day, because it's a lot easier for me to devote an hour, 1 hour to the canning process in a day than to devote 3 to 5 hours. So right now I'm just loading my pressure canner with my glass jars full of water, and I'm gonna get this boiling, and what it's gonna do is get everything hot, and it will also sterilize the jars at the same time. The first thing we're canning is my chicken bone broth. Now, how I make my bone broth is usually one night for dinner, I'll make a whole chicken. After dinner, I debone the chicken, remove as much meat off of that chicken as I can, and put it in the fridge for another meal. I leave the chicken carcass, all the bones, the cartilage, everything, I leave that in the crock pot, and I'll just stick it in the fridge unless I'm planning to can directly the next day. But in this case, we had chicken a few nights ago, so I just stuck the whole crock pot in the fridge until I was ready to make the bone broth. Last night before bed, I pulled out my crock pot, plugged it in, and I went ahead and added more onions and garlic and carrots. I didn't have any celery. Normally I like to add celery, but I didn't have any. But that's okay, I'm still gonna make bone broth. Like I said, all the chicken bones are in there, and then I just filled this with water and I let it cook on low all night long. And then in the morning, I did shut it off for a little bit because it was boiling when I woke up this morning. And then before we left, I went ahead and put it back on low, and it's kind of back up to boiling right now. This has been cooking for about 15 hours. I like to aim for the 12 to 16 hour mark. You can cook it longer, but just know the longer you cook it, the more rich it is. The main difference between chicken broth and bone broth, chicken broth is cooked for a shorter period of time, usually for about 4 to 6 hours, and then you can it. Bone broth is cooked for a long period of time, and the purpose of that is the longer that you cook the liquid with the chicken bones and all of the vegetables, the more nutrition and minerals are leached from those bones and those vegetables, and it goes into the liquid, making it more nutrient dense as well as more flavorful. Chicken broth does not have as much nutrition. It's still nutritious and good for you. It just doesn't have quite as much, and it's also not quite as flavorful. It's a little bit more watered down in taste. I like to make the bone broth not only for the nutritional value. I do find when I drink a cup of this, I really do feel like it is nourishing my body. And especially if we're sick, this is my go-to thing, which is why I like to can it. I like to just have it on hand in those moments and seasons when we're all sick and we just don't have the energy to make this from scratch. I can just pull one of those jars from my storage and heat it up on the stove, and then I can add noodles and, you know, chicken and things to it if I want to, or we can just drink it straight. But when we're sick, I do find it is extremely nourishing and beneficial. The other thing I like about making bone broth is the flavor is much more concentrated. So when I use this in my recipes, I like to just can it in pints, and then I add water to it. So for example, let's say my recipe calls for a quart of chicken broth. I will just use my pint of bone broth and then add the rest in water to make up for 1 quart. So I find that just canning it this way goes further because I don't need as much in liquid, because I can add water to it later and make it chicken broth. So for those recipes, I water it down. But when we're sick or I want to just drink a mug of bone broth for the nourishment, then we just drink it straight because it's so nutritional. It's really good for you. So you can see all of that I got out of there. So now we should have some really good liquid gold, and look how dark that color is. That's what you want. You want that dark golden color. And because of how highly concentrated it is, I am going to add some water. Just so I can can more jars than just 3. Now we're going to get this on the stove to boil. Another tip that I think is really, really important is before you start canning, make sure you have a clean kitchen. At least the dishwasher is emptied so you can load dishes in as you're working. And then I try to clean as I go. That way, at the end of the canning process, I'm not so overwhelmed by the abundant amount of dirty dishes. My countertops are piled high with this, that, and everything. There's nothing worse than being in the kitchen all day only to have to be more so in the kitchen to finish cleaning up. So clean as you go. It really does help. I've got my canner going, so we're just waiting for that to boil. My lids are on low. We want the lids and bands to be nice and warm. And my broth is back here, and we're gonna get it to a nice simmer. Steam is now consistently coming out of the chimney, so we're going to time it for 10 minutes. Once the 10-minute timer goes off, we'll put the cap on the chimney, and that's when pressure will begin building inside the canner. Now that our cap is on the chimney, pressure is beginning to build inside the canner. So you'll see the needle moving off of 0. Our goal is to get to 10 pounds pressure. Once the needle's to 10 pounds pressure, we want to hold the heat and essentially hold the pressure there. So you'll have to learn about where that's at with your stove. So for me, I have to start putting the heat down now. So right now it's on medium high. Once I get closer to 10, I'll put it to medium. Sometimes I even have to put it to medium low. It just kind of depends, but you want to keep an eye on it and you want to hold that pressure. Since we're doing pints, it will be 20 minutes. So we'll process these for 20 minutes at 10 pounds pressure. We're at 10 pounds pressure, so we're going to set the timer for 20 minutes. While our bone broth is processing in the pressure canner, we're going to go ahead and get started with our pickled eggs that we can can in the water bath canner. Now I'm really excited to share this with you because I did a previous batch and they turned out amazing. They're delicious. They canned really, really well, and I'm super excited to share this recipe with you. Now, my recipe has been adapted from another video. Her recipe will be linked in the description box below. Mine's a little bit different, but I just want to be very clear. This is not an FDA or USDA approved recipe. This is something that has been done for many generations. The Amish do it. My great-grandparents did it, and this is my second time doing this. And the last batch, we've opened them, we've eaten them. They were delicious. So just continue at your own discretion and do your own research. To begin, the first thing we need to do is make our pickling brine. So the first ingredient is vinegar. We have to do 15 cups of vinegar. You can do white vinegar, apple cider vinegar, or a combination of both. The next ingredient is salt. Most recipes for this recommend using pickling salt. I used real sea salt. I like using real sea salt because it's got all the minerals in it that are really, really nutritious and good for your body. And in the last batch I did, they turned out great. So I don't really know if there'd be much of a difference. Maybe the eggs would be saltier with the pickling salt. I'm not really sure. But the real sea salt worked very, very well. We're gonna add 3/4 cup of sea salt to our vinegar brine. Give this a good stir, and then we're gonna go ahead and put this on the stovetop and bring it to a boil. Our next step is to peel our garlic. We're going to add 1 garlic clove to each jar. And what's really cool about pickling eggs is that it's very versatile. You can do all kinds of things and add all kinds of different vegetables and spices to the jar. I've seen recipes for adding soy sauce to them. I added red pepper flakes to my last batch. The previous batch, I kept it pretty simple and just stuck to pepper, mustard seed, and then I did the garlic, and those turned out great. So you can really go as basic or as creative as you'd like. Our timer went off, so I'm going to go ahead and turn the heat off, and we're going to let our canner cool completely until the dial gets back to 0. Because my pressure canner is still going, I can't set up my water bath canner, so I'm going to show you another way that you can get your jars ready without heating them up and getting everything hot first, because that's really important, is that your jars are sterilized and that everything's hot before you load it into the hot canner. But I'm going to show you another way that you can do it that's a little bit easier, and it's just nice to have options, especially when you're busy and you're canning and cooking and doing multiple things at once. You just want to make sure that you're consistent and you're still following the basic rules. And I go much more into detail in the beginners videos that are in the description box below. The next ingredient for our pickled eggs is, of course, hard-boiled eggs. I am getting so many eggs from my chickens. It's a huge blessing. I'm super, super grateful for all of the abundance of eggs. So I've had to find ways to preserve them because we just can't eat them fast enough. I've been giving some away. So that's why I started pickling and canning some of these eggs, so that way when the chickens slow down, I will have some on the shelf that we can defer to. So I hard-boiled these yesterday, and I hard-boiled them for, I believe, 9 to 10 minutes. And the key with this is you want to make sure that there's no imperfections in the egg. So once you've boiled it and you've removed the shell, you don't want to use hard-boiled eggs that have nicks or big chunks missing. Now, some of them aren't perfect, like this one is, it's probably hard to see, but it's a little bit muddled. I'm okay using that, as long as there's not large chunks missing or gashes or anything like that. Aside from that, it's just the garlic cloves and the spices. So I'm gonna show you how I load up these jars. And again, you can get really creative, which is what's really fun about this recipe. So the first step is to load your garlic cloves into each jar. Next, I'm adding a 1/4 teaspoon of ground mustard seed to the larger jars. And I'm adding 1/8 of a teaspoon to the smaller jars. A good shake of pepper into each jar. And now we're ready to add our eggs. You don't want to smush the eggs in. You want to kind of compact them in, but you don't want to smush them or break the eggs. Our dial is down at 0, so we're going to go ahead and set the timer for 10 minutes. And once that 10 minutes goes off, we can remove this, cap right here. Our timer just went off, so we're gonna go ahead and slowly remove the cap. And now we can slowly unlock the lid. I've got my eggs in the water bath canner, and normally what I like to do, as I did with the pressure canner, is I like to fill my jars with water and heat them up and sterilize them in the boiling water, then empty the water out and load them up. That's how I've kind of always done it. Sometimes I'll put the jars in the dishwasher and time it so when the dishwasher's done, I pull the jars out and they're nice and hot and clean, and then you load the food into the jars. But because I didn't have room on my stovetop to get this going, I'm doing it a little different. So my jars are loaded up, as you saw. They're put in the water bath canner, and I'm going to get the water boiling while the jars are in there. Now mind you, the jars were already clean and sterile. I just went ahead and put the food in, and we're gonna heat the jars up with the water. And then once the water boils, we'll lower them down and we'll start the processing. We're gonna let these sit on the counter, just like with the broth, for about 3 to 4 hours, and we'll check the seals. It's the next day, and most of my jars sealed. I had one of my pickled eggs not seal, as well as one of my bone broth. So I just stuck those in the fridge, and the pickled eggs should last for several weeks in the fridge. The bone broth I will probably use within the next 5 to 7 days. But overall, I was really happy that the rest of them sealed. So they've been sitting on the counter for 24 hours. And what I'm gonna do now is just clean the jars off and label them and store them in my food storage pantry. Thank you for joining me in today's video. I hope you found it helpful and encouraging. If you're new to canning, I hope this motivates you to get out there and try it, because it is a lot of fun. The recipes will be in the description box below, so if you need those, you can check them out there, as well as the original pickled egg recipe. I will link that video down there too. Hope you guys have a wonderful week, and we'll see you on the next video.